organization, the World Council on City Data. We host a network of cities that are reporting data in a standardized way against the new international standard for city data, ISO 37120. That standard defines methodologies for 100 indicators across social, environmental, economic performance, covering the full suite of city services and issues, climate, air quality, health, education, and energy. We have the first 20 cities that have applied the standard and had their data verified and certified. A very interesting group, including London, Barcelona, Los Angeles, Shanghai, Johannesburg, and we're now moving to the next 100 cities. All that information is now available in a complete open data portal, dataforcities.org. Now, we're in a position now where we can say, well, what can we now do with that data? And there's some very exciting opportunities. And I think one of the most interesting one is having this sort of multi-dimensional information is to look at this agenda around energy productivity. So I'm very excited to be moderating this panel today. We've had a good introduction in many ways, having the amazing George Ferguson lead off today, and also obviously Mark Watts from C40 that have given that initial framing around the importance of cities in this agenda. I think I'd start by framing it, we've just had a big sort of global big picture discussion, but if you take into account that cities are responsible for 70–80% of energy use, and they're also responsible for 70–80% of economic output, a big global discussion on energy productivity is actually a discussion about action at the local level, at the city scale. Now, cities in many ways have some challenges. Obviously, urban energy systems are complex, and we know from the work that the C40 did around mayoral powers that city leaders don't necessarily have their hands on all the levers around the energy system. But it is at a scale where you can think systematically, where you can get the key stakeholders in a room, and where you can talk about concrete action. Just as importantly, city leaders are already driving this agenda. They may not be using the terminology energy productivity, but they're taking very bold leadership on climate, which means at the city level ambitious action on the built environment and transportation in terms of its efficiency. They're always interested in economic growth, in local economic opportunity and employment, and also about the importance of benefits to the most vulnerable and disadvantaged members of society, all aspects of the energy productivity agenda. So what we're going to now look at, the framing of this discussion, I think, is looking at some of the key elements of a traditional discussion on energy efficiency now through the lens and the additional opportunities that energy productivity framing creates. We've got panelists representing multiple layers in terms of lighting solutions, in terms of buildings, and then in terms of district scale energy. So what we're going to do, it's a sort of two-part discussion. First we want, because this is an event that's looking at the business role, we're going to sort of start by looking at what the solutions are. And then we're going to use the energy productivity lens to think about more creatively about how we can start scaling and delivering implementation at the scale we need. So I'm going to introduce our first panelist, Harry Verhaar, who's the head of global public and government affairs at Philips Lighting. I'm sure many of you will know Harry. He's had 20 years of experience in lighting, and he's responsible for the strategy, outreach, and stakeholder management on energy, climate change, resource efficiency, and sustainable development, and also is very active in a number of the key global partnerships. So I'll start by asking Harry, we obviously know lighting is a critical solution area in this space, high efficiency lighting, but the uptake and the delivery is just not happening at the scale we need. Now, Philips has done a lot of excellent work in innovating around not just the technology, but also the business models to deliver at scale. And I think there was some in the Philips Lighting CEO presentation, now looking at how new models are doing energy efficient lighting and other things at city scale. So I was wondering if you could start by maybe giving us some insights into these new city scale lighting solutions.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew, and then it's an honor and a pleasure being here with all of you. I think we're very much, let's say, trying to accomplish the same thing. I believe in creating momentum, so I think also many small initiatives count, so that in the end we move the needle. Maybe just before I move into the city examples, coming back to the question on COP21, I think apart from what will be agreed technically and in policies and financing, the main thing, and I think we are important ambassadors to that needs to change is the mindset. And actually how that we bring across and also bottom up as businesses and as subnational governments, that despite the necessity and the urgency to do things differently, that actually this is a massive opportunity with widespread benefits. It's an innovation agenda. I was once asked, what do you think about the word sustainability? Well, I said, or sustainable development, I said, well, it has two sides to it. One, it has a lot of convening power, because people love new things and new terminology like energy productivity as well. But the other side is that also it makes people think, hey, again, something different on the busy agenda that I already had. So I think we will be successful when those words are no longer used and are intrinsic to the way that we manage innovation and progress. So then going to cities, so I'm not here to sell you LED lighting, rest assured. But we use it as one example of the many things we need to do, particularly in the energy efficiency space, as we know, because we waste so much, that this is where the main challenge lies. And then in addition, how we can further clean up by going to renewables and doing other things. The report, that is also why I commissioned this report last year. And you will remember that when we called for the phase out of incandescent light bulbs, which was in December 2006, time flies when you're having fun, that there was a lot of debate. I even participated here in debates. It was on BBC One with your then Prime Minister in March 2007 when Angela Merkel announced that this was going to happen. And just as an energy productivity example, only 1% of the input energy is converted into lumens, into light with incandescent light bulbs. So it's just one example of how much we can improve. Cities, half of their energy bill is public lighting. Which is public offices, which is, I think, is probably the largest non-residential building space. It's schools and it's street lighting. So we see many cities acting, and I think we will talk also throughout this panel about the policies and the finance and technology, but this time we'll start at the very end by giving a few examples and then showing how this is actually becoming more systemic. We've recently done, as our CEO Eric Rondelin has explained, we've smartened up, we've connected the LED lighting in the city of Los Angeles, 160,000 light points. But what is interesting to know is that the LED lighting that was put in place a couple of years ago is not ours, unfortunately. But then the mayor found out in the last 2 years, like, hey, it's not smart. I cannot dim, I cannot see what happens, I cannot monitor how long it lasts, and et cetera, et cetera. Can we smart and can we make this connected? So then one of my colleagues, he went there with 20 of those smart connector nodes that Eric showed, and he said to the mayor, well, you ask your installers, drive around the city, let them plug in everywhere, and US streetlights have a space for that. And then when they're driving back to your office here, we'll show you where they are. And so happened. So then installers drove off, they plugged in the stuff, and then another colleague, he opened the laptop, and they saw a map of LA, and then those 20 nodes, they had given those streetlights IP addresses, and he could immediately see where they were on the map, he could dim them, he could play around with them, and he was flabbergasted. So that again shows what is possible with new technology. Buenos Aires, I think, is one example of a city, had even more than cities here, that suffer from public budget deficits. I think Buenos Aires at this moment is implementing, I think they're about at 70% implementation, 91,000 smart LED streetlights. And this is actually the city, also Eric referred to, that citizens are actively speaking out that they feel safer, that in areas where this has been done, the crime rate goes down. Hey, and for Buenos Aires, it means reducing public budget deficits. There's one more example that I'd like to give. and that is the Empire State Building. So the Empire State Building, of course, you want to see it stand out. It had lights with filters and all very laborious to change the lights. It now has smart LED lights so that can be, you can make whole compositions on how you want it lit. I think also later this month, I think during Climate Week New York City, they will be playing around in New York with the crystal ball and maybe the Empire State Building. But the thing is, they're saving 60–70% of energy with smart street lights. And if you really want to feel, because this is not just about rational things, but about emotional things, if you really want to feel what new technology does, go to YouTube or just Google Alicia Keys, Empire State Building, New York. Because then you'll see that from last year, I think, then Terri knows, Alicia Keys, she sang in New York, but then that was with a whole movie when the lights on the Empire State Building, when they were inaugurated and changing. I can tell you it gives you goosebumps and maybe an occasional tear in your eyes, and then you'll know that this is the innovation area. This is actually 21st century solutions. It's about tackling climate change, it's about tackling economic challenge, but hey, this is the better future that we want to create. Then, so what is helping us? Of course, this takes a lot of effort, but what you see happening in lighting, I think you see also happening in other areas that we'll hear about, is we are moving from analog to digital. We're moving not only from lamps to LEDs, but we're moving from dumb to smart. We're moving from selling and invoicing hardware to leasing services. And this is also where cities come in, because previously our business was a replacement business. As a consumer, you go to the shop and you buy what has burned out at home. Well, city mayors or cities did the same, but then the maintenance manager, the energy manager, the maintenance manager in office. But now, moving towards these new technologies and connected and smart also means that the city mayor is not only somebody who we would love to speak to, but he's going to be a key decision maker. No longer his maintenance manager on a few street lights or a street, but actually you're speaking to the city mayor about a large-scale project. So I think in that sense we are helped with the way that this whole energy transition is unfolding, because it forces us to go to larger projects, and that also makes the financing easier, so lower transaction costs. So I think in that sense, I'm very hopeful that this is going to help us. But then we need to work together through the World Council on City Data, the Climate Group, World Green Building Council, because that will give us the platform and the stage to show these examples so that they can be copied and replicated and scaled, and that at COP21 we can then show our national leaders who are a bit further away maybe from having their feet in the mud, that hey, it's beneficial, it's happening. Hey, and the good news is that those people in cities and proactive business, they are doing the job, so that actually through that they embrace the ambition level that is needed and sign up to something where we need some policy frameworks and other things that will then further enable us then to this better future.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Harry. Some wonderful examples and a nice framing for the broader opportunities within the city space. I'll next move to our next panellist, Terri Wills, who's the CEO of the World Green Building Council. Terri, the World Green Building Council unites 100 green building councils around the world that are greening building through market transformation. As many of you will know, Terri was previously in a senior leadership role at C40, where she spearheaded the C40's networks that have had a direct impact on over half of the C40 city network. So Terri, I'll start by, obviously, and Harry's made reference to Paris, we're not going to achieve a 2-degree goal without really ambitious transformational actions on buildings. I think that's absolutely critical. Also, I think if you start looking from a productivity sense, in the city sense, as city economies move from industry to more tertiary service-based economies, the building becomes a much more important aspect of the economic sort of infrastructure. So it's particularly important for our energy productivity framing. It would be great to get your views on what the big opportunities are in terms of driving action, not just for climate, but for energy productivity more broadly.
Yeah, great question. And I think I agree with a lot of what you said, Harry, that we should look at it as an opportunity. And I think that's really important to remain positive. There's been some incredible innovation in technologies and lighting and other technologies that we should be really optimistic about. I think our perspective at the World Green Building Council is that we do have a huge challenge ahead, but we know what the solutions are. Right now, 40% of global energy use comes from buildings. 30% of global emissions come from buildings, and in certain cities that's more than double. So for example, in New York, 70% of their emissions come from buildings. In London, it's almost 80%. And that's just today. So we know that by 2030, emissions will double if we continue business as usual. So if we continue building as we're building now, if we continue operating our buildings as we do now. So this is a huge challenge that we need to overcome. And I think particularly in some of the countries and the cities in the global south. So if you look at London, I think the stat is something like 80% of the buildings that will exist in 2050 exist now. In India, it's the converse. So 2/3 of buildings that will exist in 2030 don't exist now. So I think we know what we have to do in that in many countries and many cities, we have to tackle building and we have to get to net carbon zero building. And then also, where we have existing buildings, we absolutely need deep refurbishment. We know from some of the statistics from the International Energy Agency that we have to reduce carbon emissions by it's 84 gigatons of CO2 by 2050. And the only way that we can do it is through these two goals of net zero carbon buildings and deep retrofit. But I think what's important also is that, we need to work really closely with cities. Cities have a lot of powers to do this, and I'm sure Zoe from C40, who's in the audience, can talk a lot more knowledgeably about some of this. But we know from some of the research that C40 has done that 57% of C40 cities have significant powers over buildings. So that means they have strong kind of regulatory and policy powers. But that means there's a significant percentage of cities that don't have strong powers over buildings. And so cities and mayors need to work with the private sector. They also need to work with countries. So many countries actually have the regulatory powers to implement ambitious policies. But we believe at the World Green Building Council that the private sector has the solutions and can demonstrate leadership that can really support the cities in accomplishing energy productivity, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. But we also think it's really important that we don't just look at energy efficiency in buildings. I mean, we are called the World Green Building Council, and we really look at green building as a holistic entity. It's not just about buildings that are energy efficient. We are working on essentially definition and criteria for green buildings that incorporate many aspects of energy efficiency, but that also have a lot of other benefits. So for example, the health and well-being aspects of green building has been given increasing focus over the last few years, and we're getting some incredible data through, which is helping to make the business case as well. So 90% of our time as humans is spent in buildings. So these can't just be buildings that are energy efficient, they have to be buildings that we want to live and work and play in. And the health and well-being aspects and criteria are actually really matching what we're seeing as sustainable buildings. So things like natural ventilation is really good from an energy efficiency perspective and from an environmental perspective, but also we're seeing increases in productivity in offices where there's increased and improved ventilation. So sometimes as much as 11% increase in productivity is directly related to improved air quality in a building. We're also learning a lot about biophilia, fancy word for basically that humans feel better when they're in and around nature. And so when buildings and green buildings incorporate nature into their design, either by the views that they offer or by incorporating greenery into the buildings, that also increases productivity. So we're really seeing a business case for green buildings, and we believe really strongly that it can't just be about energy efficiency, because the way that humans work is that we can't think about some goal that we have for 2050. We believe at the World Green Building Council that green buildings, we have to focus on the case that they are better for us today as well as better for us tomorrow. And so some initiatives that are focused on really demonstrating this and accomplishing this, I mean, we're seeing certification all over the world is increasingly important. So green rating tools, I'm sure many of you are familiar with LEED, BREEAM, we also have Green Star in Australia and South Africa, there's Green Mark in Singapore, and these are important because what they do is they're able to actually increase accountability and transparency about what actually is a green building, how much energy they're saving, and cities around the world can really use these to recognize leadership from the private sector, and in some cities they can also use these to help them regulate. So we know that, for example, in Chicago, they started with a voluntary scheme where they're asking the market and asking companies, please step forward and reduce your greenhouse gas emissions and your energy use in buildings. And then once they saw critical mass of action, the mayor was actually able to step forward and say, we're now ready to regulate. And we've seen similar issues or examples in Tokyo, where they have their cap and trade program, which is hugely effective. And really what they needed to see was support from the private sector. I was in Singapore last week with Green Mark, which is their building rating tool. There's a report released by the New Climate Economy yesterday, which basically shows that the energy potential or energy savings potential from Green Mark being scaled across Singapore is as much as $400 million by 2030. So the scale is significant. So we think that the certification tools are really important, and then that can help the mayors implement really strong policies. There are many other examples, but those are just some highlights that we really believe in.
Fabulous. Excellent, Terri. Some excellent examples. The point on city leadership, let's come back to that. I think that's a really interesting area to explore further. And certainly I like the examples you gave of the multiple benefits. You can see then the value of moving from the framing of energy efficiency to a broader discussion on energy productivity. Great. I'll now move to our third speaker, Mads Pinnerup, who's the Vice President of the Heating Segment at Danfoss. Mads is the VP for Business Support and Focused Businesses on Heating, a segment within Danfoss which produces and sells an extensive range of energy-efficient products and services. So Mads, looking now at energy and energy systems at the district scale, in many ways, district energy is an old technology in many ways, but it's been very interesting in the last 10, 15 years how as cities have started to look at how do we achieve deep transformations, looking fundamentally at the energy system, and the opportunities of district energy have really come to the top of the agenda. But these are obviously big and often complex projects. So it would be good to hear from you a bit about what the opportunities are now looking forward, and the role that district energy can play in a 2-degree world and a 2-degree sort of urban infrastructure fabric, and how we can deliver that.
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the invite here. Now you say it's an old technology. I probably prefer to say it's a proven technology. Yep. But you're right, district energy is it's connecting buildings, and I very much agree to what you say. There's a lot of opportunities in the building, but it's connecting the building with pipes where you move water, warm and cold water. So I think talking energy is not electricity in itself. It's also the move of warm and cold water. Surely what we see is the urbanization is happening, and in 2050 we will see 70% of the global population living in cities. So I think we have the opportunity really to take advantage of this urbanization to implement the right energy systems. And we have the belief that we have the technology available. As said, it's proven technology, so it's about, for city planners, really to plan the city right in order that we get the benefits of proven systems. Then of course we can say we do see changes in the energy system. We do see changes from heat-only boilers or whatever is being used in a district energy system traditionally, to really take the energy system to make it a flexible system, because you can connect any technology to a district heating system. It could be wind, it could be solar, it could be waste incineration, it could be combined heat and power and so on. So really you have the flexibility here really to connect also the new technologies into, you can say, a proven technology. No doubt that district heating has the opportunity really to provide big steps forward, and the International Lynch agency says that, or predicts that 60% of the savings that has to come from the energy sector can actually be achieved from district energy if we implement the new ways of doing district energy. Some examples, it's already happening out there. For instance, in Paris, Louvre is actually cooled by the water from the Seine. So really, it's already happening out there. We have other examples in other places of the world. If we go to China, where you can say some byproducts of industrial manufacturing, that's heat. So instead of just taking the heat out and letting that into the sky, you can actually connect that heat via a piping system into the city. We are part of a project in China doing that, and that actually provides free heat for 200,000-300,000 people. And that was a byproduct of an industrial player already in that area. So really, they have a business model now around their waste product, and now we get free heat free in terms of CO2 for 200,000 people in that city. So I think really this is an example of technologies already available in the market that we just need to implement. So I think this to me is not really in this area so much a discussion about if and how. It's already here. So we just need to think business smart about it, right, and get the right business cases. The technology is here. It's proven. We just need to combine it smartly. And here district energy really has something to offer, because we can also use the district energy system or the district heating system as a buffer system. So that means if you have excess electricity in certain times of the day, if the wind is blowing, you have too much electricity, you can actually store it in the water. So you have big buffer tanks here. So really this does provide then the flexibility of the system connecting the citizens of the urban areas. So yes, I do believe district heating is a proven technology. I prefer to say it that way, but I think it really holds a lot of potential going forward, also combining all kinds of new heat or energy generation that can be combined into a district heating network.
Yep. Excellent. Well, I think we've seen here a very sort of quick but very powerful overview of the opportunities, the solution landscape that we have now at the city scale, and obviously acknowledging that all the three sort of technology sets and solution sets we've been talking about are interconnected. I'd like to now sort of talk about the opportunity to scale up these solutions and look at a couple of specific areas where there seems to be important opportunity. The first is the issue of city leadership, a point that we all raise, but particularly Terri. So I'll address this first question to you, and drawing off your experience from the C40 network. Do you see, is this energy productivity, is this a new agenda for mayors? Is this something that can be part of that, the mayor's sort of political agenda, or is this something that sort of sits and supports the other things that are already going on, like climate action, like energy efficiency, like local economic competitiveness and prosperity? Do you see it as, is there a space for a new agenda, or is it just supporting the other ones that are already on the table?
Always been, not always, but for many mayors that are leading, and I'd say particularly C40 cities, partial, I think, they are leading, they're seeing energy efficiency as high on the agenda, but I think as we're learning a lot more about the co-benefits of energy efficiency, that it's enabling mayors to be able to be bolder with their actions as well. I mean, many mayors have been fantastic and have just stood up and said, we know this is the right thing to do, so we're going to do it, and we'll find a way to make it work. But then increasingly, the more mayors that have been doing that, the more the private sector has been identifying solutions. It's really been supporting and almost being the wind beneath the sails for the mayors to do a lot more. And I think, particularly the social and economic development aspects of it. I know, for example, in South Africa, it's been really interesting because South Africa their energy infrastructure is just crumbling from a lack of investment over a long period of time, and they're having load sharing in many of the major cities, electricity outages, which is hurting productivity. It's a real challenge. And so the Green Building Council of South Africa is working really closely with cities like Tshwane, Durban, Cape Town, and Joburg, and really supporting the mayors and working together to identify solutions so that those cities can continue to be competitive, almost irregardless of what's happening at the national level, which I think is important. But I also think cities are seeing this as a competitive opportunity. I mean, cities are, they're friendly with each other and they work together really collaboratively through entities like the C40, but they're also in competition with one another. They're competing for talent, they're competing for businesses, and I think what we're seeing from some of the leading cities is that green buildings and energy efficient buildings are actually a competitive advantage. You know, Singapore, it's incredible what they're doing, and their developers are now so experienced in this area that, you know, they're getting huge business out of China, emerging economies where actually there's a lot of demand now. So I think for cities to actually say that, you know, they can stand up and have some of these policies and regulations and programs, that it's good for the economy and for social and economic development, and we're just seeing more proof, which I think is helping them do that.
Harry, you mentioned in your introductory remarks the new report that Philip's supported on the Energy Productivity and Prosperity Index. Now that report is primarily focused at the country level. I was just wondering, have you had a chance to sort of have those types of discussions around that framing with city leaders as well?
Yeah, maybe good to first say it, and so we, maybe also for the whole of today, and I think it has been said in different ways, then the overall aim and objective remains to increase ambition level and actions on energy efficiency, because we need to double the rate of energy efficiency improvement so that we actually had then balance global emission growth and then further clean up and get on a more sustainable development track. We do see that energy efficiency itself, for some people, is a bit boring because it has been spoken about since the 70s. So it's a bit, let's say, a bit eroded. But also we are dealing with many different stakeholders, and people speak different languages. We see some governments in Europe, but also other countries, they don't speak the language of saving, because they find, I even know one, let's say one prime minister pretty close to where I live, who would then say, well, saving, reducing, away with that, we now need to grow again. So therefore the object indeed of the concept of energy productivity is to make things comparable. So actually also to inspire, I think, at national and subnational level people to compete for a better future, to have an index where you can do that, but also to show the economics. I think all of us have probably heard arguments, well, we have now financial crisis, economic crisis, okay, let's turn down a little bit what we're all doing on climate change because we've got more urgent things at hand. Well, we're showing then everything is connected, and energy efficiency, improving productivity, is exactly addressing those concerns, because for part they are resulting from the fact that we waste so much. The insecurity of energy supply, budget deficits, it's all related. And if you then see, I think also there importantly, if we would now see at national or subnational level, people say, hey, I'm actually getting more inspired about energy efficiency, but what do I do? And that is also why in the report we say that energy efficiency is not an invisible form of energy, but it's putting people back to work. So to put in double glazing, indeed, to change the lighting, but also to insulate, to do the district heating and all of that, is putting people back to work. That's the phase of energy efficiency. And if we see that, and those people are going to be getting the jobs in the more productive, energy productive cities, making them more livable, the buildings more, let's say, better place to work, live, and leisure. I think that's the key thing, what we want to accomplish. So, and there's one really important thing that I would like to say, that is, if we implement better technologies, energy efficiency, renewables, in all the new infrastructure and all the appliances that we switch and all of that, it's not going to be sufficient. So what is really key towards COP21 and beyond is that with energy efficiency, and that is linked to the doubling of the rate of energy efficiency improvement, we need to accelerate renovation rate. Let's say we need to accelerate renovation of the existing infrastructure. 2 examples, street lighting, which we know well. The evolutionary renovation rate of street lighting is 3% per year. So if we only do the new street lights and the ones that are renovated, it takes 30 years for all the street lights to become LED. And probably in those 30 years, the first ones are already far behind what is possible. So we need to increase, we need to accelerate renovation rates, and the same is for buildings. We know all the discussions in the European Parliament on the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, 1% building renovation per year, and then arguing to go to 2 or 3, and our politicians thinking, this is so difficult, please not, and not us. I think this is really key. If we don't succeed in accelerating renovation rates, then we're also, you could say, fried above 2 degrees centigrade. And that is why also, I think with Danfoss and with some others, last year we proposed to Sustainable Energy for All, the big energy program of the UN, to create a collaborative effort, which is the Global Energy Efficiency Accelerator Platform. We all know that the UN is the only global parliament, but they have been made more or less powerless by their members. But then they come up with very good ideas like Sustainable Energy for All, very good initiatives. And there, this is not going to be a big project, but it's actually going to bring some of the smaller initiatives and some of the associations and collaborative platforms that exist, like the Climate Group, Regions 20, World Green Building Council, ICLAI, which is mentioned together, so that there, then proactive sectors and companies and subnational governments, they work together and show this is being done. And I can tell it to you in this way. If you look at the world as a pyramid with 4 layers, the top layer being the UN, trying top down, and again in December to do something good in common interest. Then the second layer are regional and national leaders who you would say struggle to agree on anything in common interest. And then subnational governments and sectors, lighting, aviation, transport, district heating, buildings, that we inspire each other horizontally, and vertically we work together, so that actually this is the way that we get the progress. And I think the cities, they're close to their citizens. They also want to be re-elected. They need to manage the budget, so they can't go anywhere else when the budget is not, let's say, doesn't match. So I think that's how we do it.
Excellent. Thanks, Harry. Let's continue that discussion on partnership and collaboration. Mads, you're also part of the SE for All Energy Accelerator program, so it'd be good to hear your perspectives on that. But also at the city level, I imagine district energy programs require working with a lot of stakeholders to make them work. Sure. It'd be good to, what are some of the key success factors in making those projects work, particularly in the context of perhaps retrofitting them within existing cities?
Yeah, I fully agree to what Harry is saying, and yes, the Energy for All, we believe, and the question was also up in the former panel, that sometimes we are competitors, sometimes we need to cooperate. And I think what we do under the C for All program is really to spread the knowledge about district heating and what the opportunities are. And I think, yes, in that context, if we talk about competition or cooperating, I think it's more fun for us as companies to fight in a bigger market than it is to compete against each other in a smaller market. So I think really this cooperation across companies, cities, but also the financing partners and institutions. I think that's really what's being done in the C4. And when we move into cities, yes, of course, there's really this about renovation, and I think that will be a key driver, really to upgrade the existing systems, also to when the building mass is changing, the need for heat is becoming lower, right? So we also need to upgrade our energy systems, really to provide what we call 3rd or 4th generation district energy, really low temperature, low pressure, really to accommodate what will be the need of the future housing. So we need this dialogue, and I think a lot of this happens at city mayor level, it happens at municipality level, it happens at local heating company level. So that's really where we need, I think, the national, the international, and the city, and even the local governments to work together across this scheme and work together with companies like us. And then we need to have the solid business cases. And I think, why should cities do this? And it's good business. There's good payback. It's good for the environment. There's jobs in this, and the technology is here. So I think really this is a question about really sharing the knowledge about the technologies and really to go out and do some actual showcases. And funny enough, this morning I was having a meeting with a finance institution, and they say, there's enough money here. We need the projects. And when we come here, we say there's enough projects, there's no financing. So really, there is somehow a gap here where we say there are good projects, but we speak different languages. So we really need the cities, the projects, the financing institutions, and people like us from the industry to come together and say, how can we really bridge this so we make the good projects come alive? Yep. And we make it a repeatable model. So I think really the cross-sector cooperation, it's key really for this to happen. And then I think we should stop discussing so much how to do it. We should start doing it, right? It's there. We can do it already.
Absolutely. So let's come back to that question of financing in the next round. On the subject of collaboration, there's probably no area where collaboration is more important in the climate action space than perhaps in the building sector, where we have this sort of fragmented value chain. So many different actors with different incentives, different perspectives, and obviously collaboration is essential if you're going to drive the action that we're talking about. It would be great, Terri, to hear some of the lessons you've learned from the World Green Business Council, from your members, on how you make that multi-sector collaboration work in practice.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's never easy, but it's so important. I mean, I think when the Green Building Councils were originally formed, there's just this frustration that there's this amazing opportunity in green building, but the architects were over here, and the developers and the manufacturers and the investors were kind of talking amongst themselves, and I don't think there's a business case for this. So I think a lot of the work has been really, bringing them together to share concerns. Okay, well, this is what I have an issue with, and then getting the groups to figure out some solutions. I mean, I think there's been some really interesting examples of this. One is GRESB. I don't know how many people are familiar with it, but it's basically the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, I think. And they just launched one of their reports last week. And basically what they're doing is they're working with investors that have invested in major portfolios of buildings, because many companies now work on a portfolio basis across many countries. And what they're starting to look at is the business case, and the business case for why green buildings are better. And they look at energy efficiency, they look at the future value of the asset, they look at health and well-being from a productivity perspective, and what the data that they're starting to come up with, and they're giving to investors and giving access to investors, so that investors can take a look at this in the way that investors have to, and look at the risk and return profile. And I think that's where there's always been the gap between the projects and the financing. There's always money, there's always projects, but the risk return profile that the investors need sometimes just isn't matched in the way that the projects are developed. So we think that this is a really interesting development, and then it feeds back to the green building sector to say to developers and others, okay, these are the kinds of things that we need to work on to make sure that the business case is strong, to make sure that then we get investment. So I think that's a great one. And then a second is some work that a couple of one GBC has been doing with climate bonds. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the Climate Bonds Initiative, and essentially green bonds or climate bonds, which have the opportunity, both issued by cities, but also companies, to leverage huge amounts of investment into green or energy efficient or low carbon infrastructure. And so this is a huge opportunity for green building around the world. And because many of our green building councils have rating tools, we have access to an incredible amount of data about the performance of buildings and the standards that they should meet from an energy efficiency perspective. So Green Building Council Australia has teamed up with Climate Bonds to share a lot of the performance data from their tool, Green Star, so that Climate Bonds can start developing some standards for what might qualify as a green building or a low carbon building, so that when a bond is issued, that investment can flow into those kinds of buildings that meet the standard. So I think those are just a couple of examples, but I think always in collaboration, we need to focus on what each group is good at. And I think that's why, SE4All is really interesting. I think there's also the Buildings Day work that we're doing with France and UNEP and IPEC. which is really bringing all of the partners together, including in finance, and saying, this is what we represent, how do we work better with these other sectors, and not trying to overlap, but actually to complement, and I think that's really important.
It's come up already a couple of times now, the issue of finance, and this issue of that there's lots of money and there's lots of sort of interesting projects, and how do we bridge that gap? It'd be good to hear some perspectives from the panel on where you think we are in that sort of closing that gap. Are things going to happen, or do we still need intervention action to drive the necessary finance, particularly for projects and implementation at the city level? What's your sort of, looking into your crystal ball, Harry?
Well, I don't need a crystal ball for this.
Okay.
Because we see in practice indeed, so when we talk to the European Bank for Regional Development, when we talk to commercial banks, DLL, Société Générale, all of them, they say they have the money, but they don't have the projects. And the other way around, then city mayors and others would say, yeah, we've got projects, but where's the money? In the end, a more sustainable, resource-efficient solution is cheaper, so you can even make money. You don't need more money. So what we are seeing is when we have projects and bring those two together, you can close the deal and you can accomplish the project. But then what we need to learn is not so much where's the money, but how do we finance? So what is the financing mechanism? Because many companies, if you would, let's say, renovate their buildings, or in the city, if you do the street lighting, they don't want, and neither do we want to have that loan or that investment end up on the balance sheet. Some municipalities are not allowed to have that on their balance sheet or to increase their debt level. This investment into the future seen as a debt, additional debt. Strange, because doing nothing would actually increase their debt level. But also for us, we are a commercial enterprise, we are not a bank. So I think that's more the challenge. What is the financing mechanism? And we're increasingly seeing with special purpose vehicles where things can be done off balance sheet, that's the way to go. Like I mentioned a few projects that are fully financed. Buenos Aires, Madrid, all that street lighting Madrid, we're doing that, it's financed by a commercial bank. We're working in a West African country on solar LED street lighting, commercial bank involved. We have reached an agreement last year. We know island states, there are more than 50 island states. They often pay 40 cents per kilowatt hour. So for them, it's even more important to become more efficient. We've reached an agreement for the whole island of Aruba in the Caribbean to move the whole island to LED lighting financed by Rabobank, DLL. Yep. So I'd say the solutions are there. We just need to sit around the table together and do that.
Yep. Terri, Mads, anything more to add on that?
No, I agree, and I think the C4All initiative is also a forum where we could actually start to share some of these examples of where it works and how it works. But I think we also need to think in commercial finance. It's really how do they think? We need to speak the language, or we need to speak a common language, right? And that's, in my experience, that's not always what's happening today. We need to come together, and that's where we can also say something like C4All is a forum where we could actually put the different stakeholders together and try to develop this common language so we can actually bridge that gap that obviously is there.